Hello, everyone. My name's David Gaetano, and along with my partners Nayab and Isabella, we're going to be talking to you a little bit today about why we believe all Americans are living in a simulation.
Researchers say that finding an exact copy of yourself is one in a trillion. Many of our traits are passed down from many generations, such as hair color, eye shape, nose shape, etc. So, who's to say that we don't share the same features as someone from more than 100 years ago? Take Nicolas Cage and a man from the Civil War era, or John Travolta and his doppelganger. There is definitely a mathematical chance for two doppelgangers to exist. However, it is very unlikely. Although it is said that doppelgangers represent a parallel universe in which everything in this world is replicated in another dimension, this could just be more evidence to say that there's something wrong with the coding of our existence. Many of the doppelgangers that we have aren't alive at the same time. Most of them come from the later time periods.
Yeah, so a lot of what we think about this topic of Americans living in a simulation, we think having to do with speculation. So what we wanted to kind of see was how we could use empirical evidence, use physics, science to prove that this is actually some sort of plausible explanation for what we experience in our daily lives.
Quantum physics is the study of matter and energy at its most fundamental level. It uncovered the behaviors of the very building blocks of nature. According to physics, physical matter is just excitation from quantum fields. Particles, however, as we know of them, are just quantum fields bundled up into little tiny packets of energy. An example of this could be drops of water emanating from underlying fields or waves of energy. It's like everything was within a singular mind, and everything is a form of that mind, such as one's consciousness. Another example is a dream. Think about reality like a dream where you momentarily experience yourself to be an individual character. But in reality, you are everything in that dream. You are the entire reality expressing itself through all things.
Really what this all boils down to is we can't necessarily point to any empirical evidence as to why these indiscrepancies exist in our world. These things that we can't necessarily explain with science can be explained through the gaps in understanding that we have, especially with quantum theory and quantum mechanics. There's so much that's left to be discovered in these types of fields, and that's why this theory is so appealing to certain kinds of people. So another topic we wanted to talk on or touch on was glitches, so-called glitches that we see in especially in social media as of recently. So with our first couple, we can see a lot of popular so-called glitches um, are when we experience this sort of deja vu effect where we see two people, two instances that seem to have no probability of occurring at the same time. So we can see here two men are on the bus wearing the same shirt right next to each other, look very similar, wearing the same outfit in the same pose. So if you take all of those probabilities combined, we can see that there is such a low chance of this happening naturally. So we can kind of point the finger almost to, well, maybe all Americans are actually living in a simulation. You can see the same thing on the photo on your right, with the two women who appear to be wearing the same clothes, shopping from the same center, but then also they're very separated. So they're clearly having nothing to do with each other. Also, you can see it with the first image where they're sitting in different seats. It's this sort of deja vu effect where they're living the same lives, but not necessarily they're not necessarily cognizant of that. And we can see it all over social media. It's taking the internet by storm. We can see on TikTok, Instagram. Um, People post every time they see this because it's so crazy, and people are aware of this. This isn't something that you need to be super well researched into to understand the implications of it. You can see this photo of two older men on the left. They're wearing the same jacket. Again, they're shopping at the same thing, which same store, which indicates sort of this cross of realities where two people are living the same lives. Where potentially we think maybe in some sort of simulation, two characters are picked and, their personalities just happen to match up in the same time frame. Yeah, and this is just an example of one of the most recent phenomenon that took the internet by storm. So you can see here that the image and the reflection appears to move before the child even steps away from the mirror. So it's instances like these, especially ones that are caught on camera, that really attract people's eyes and draw people to this conspiracy theory. And even more so than, just these recent occurrences with, posting these so-called glitches on the internet for likes, there have been multiple instances throughout history where we see people, sort of freaking out about a doomsday because of some, man-made, created either calendar or, prediction set. So one such instance, would be the 2012 phenomenon, which we did a good amount of research into. So it really begins. The story starts with um, starts claims that Nibiru, a supposed planet discovered by the Sumerians, is headed towards Earth. And this catastrophe was initially predicted for May 2003, but when nothing happened, the doomsday date was actually moved forward to December 2012 and linked to the end of the one of the cycles of the ancient Mayan calendars in the winter solstice of December 2012, hence the predicted doomsday date of December 21st, 2012. So, just as the calendar you may have on your kitchen wall does not cease to exist after December 31st, that Mayan calendar does not cease to exist on December 21st, 2012. This date is the end of the Mayan long count period, but then just as your calendar begins again on January 1st, another long count period begins for the Mayan calendar. So while we see a lot of people pointing evidence to these ancient calendars, especially where we are trying to predict these doomsday events, there is a sort of lack of credibility sometimes with these predictors, especially with these reoccurring cycles where there's a supposed doomsday. And with the research that we've done into this theory and conspiracy theories like it, we just have a few final thoughts that we wanted to touch on. So, really, we want to think about who would be attracted to such a such an out there, such an obscure conspiracy theory, and it's in our opinion, it's really those who don't have anything else to point to for their reason for being here. So, throughout history, you see that religion has taken this role inside of people, and sort of people, especially more recently, are starting to think about more empirical ways to describe the way that nature works. So, with science and especially with the introduction of like quantum theory, we see a lot of scientists and particularly atheists, physicists, and more spiritual people trying to explain their world with conspiracies like all Americans are living in such a simulation. And one particular notable figure who believes in this theory, at least to some extent, is Elon Musk. And we all know he has a great deal of influence. So, in one article, he reportedly said, "The strongest argument for us being in a simulation is the following: that 40 years ago, we had Pong like two rectangles and a dot. That was what games were. Now, 40 years later, we have photorealistic 3D simulations with millions of people playing simultaneously, and it's getting better every year. And soon we'll have virtual reality or augmented reality." So, coming from one of the most influential people of our times, this is really an indicator of how much this theory is being propelled and how much um, not necessarily basis in reality, but basis in people's minds that this has, and his influence undoubtedly casted some credibility over this theory. And then we just wanted to look at again, is this actually plausible? So, without wanting to deny the possibility of this being a plausible idea, a plausible theory. Um, it's generally not a widely accepted theory by the scientific community, although we would like to point out that there are lapses in our understanding as a scientific community, as a population. We don't necessarily have all the answers that would be able to disprove such a theory. So while the burden of evidence is kind of on those who assert that we are definitely in a simulation, science can't necessarily prove that this is false. So that's something that we'd like to emphasize, not necessarily being able to prove this, but we can't necessarily prove that it's not either, which makes this such an intriguing theory. So with that, we'd just like to thank you all for listening to our presentation on this story, and here are some of our works cited. Thank you again.